Okay, welcome back to Primitive Mycology. I'm sure that I said this in the video that will accompany this, but anyways, that's what this is. Um, Earlier, I made a video, which will be accompanying this one, that went over the process of what many people refer to as cold water pasteurization. Um, in fact, it is not pasteurization at all. It's actually a type of fermentation. Um, it's kind of like pickling, or you know, kind of like the idea kind of like think about like salt fermentation, brining. Um, Works really well with wood chips and straw. I'm going to go further in and explain this here in just a minute. I got a little whiteboard so I can make sure that I try to break this down the most understandable way that I can. I've been doing this stuff for a long time, and not just this, with many things with plants too. Well beyond just gardening and stuff. But anyways, let's talk about this. So when we do what people refer to as cold water or lime pasteurization, essentially what we're doing is a type of fermentation. Our intention is to not only hydrate the substrate, whether it be wood chips or straw or whatever, but we also want to create an environment that is not good for competing bacteria and funguses to live in. So the first step of that process is to create an anaerobic environment. That is like the main thing, is complete submersion in water and cover it, seal it up, allow it to ferment. Now, kind of what's going on here, you can see, wood straw fermentation. Here are the very basics of it. Okay, so first, we're going to look at what does it do? Well, it's going to release nutrients. No matter what type of fermentation, it's going to make nutrients available. Okay. Wow, makes the whiteboard backwards. Anyways, I'll just look at it and I'll go through it here. Okay. We're also creating an anaerobic environment. We are in the process of fermentation going to lower the pH. That's just a natural part of fermentation. And again, we're hydrating our substrate. When we do just fermentation, which is often common with wood chips where no lime is added, for things like outdoor beds, or sometimes you'll ferment your wood chips even if you want to pasteurize them for different projects. There's a lot of benefits there. But those are the main things, the initial things that are happening. By adding the hydrated lime, what we're actually trying to achieve is this. Okay, by creating an anaerobic environment, we're going to kill not all, but many of the aerobic competitors. And then as it comes out of that and we drain it, many of the anaerobic that thrived in the water and the lack of oxygen, many of them will die. So we're eliminating a lot of competitors just with that step of this process. With the lime, we're going to drastically raise the pH of the water. And as it soaks into the straw or wood chips or, compost, whatever, coir, what that's actually doing is it's raising it substantially. So many of the acidic loving competitors that may be able to survive both anaerobic and aerobic conditions, many more will die, by raising the pH. Okay. And by allowing it to sit in that high pH, for about 24 hours, you're going to kill many of them acidic competitors. At the point of about 24 hours, though, where most people stop, which they're stopping really halfway through the process. I've known a lot of people to have trouble with using methods like this for like really simple cultivation. And if you're stopping at 24 hours, you're only doing part of the process. Because what's going to happen is, as that, pH starts to even out between the high pH of the water and the much lower pH of the straw or wood chips, once it begins to change and kind of balance, it takes a little while of soaking. And when you're using lime, you're really slowing down the fermentation process, basically, is what you're doing. You're, almost preserving. But given the fact that, you're not using an airlock or anything like that, you can each day crack your bucket lid, allow some oxygen in there, stir the components in there, make sure everything's pushed back down in the water, close your lid back. Now, by doing that, you are, you are going to slowly start to ferment anyway. So day 2, day 3, day 4, you're going to be actually starting to ferment now and lowering your pH. So by doing that, many of the things that were initially there at this point, there's many things that have died. Okay, so once you take your pH back down, and you start coming back closer to neutral, many of the alkaline thriving competitors are now going to start to die. Never all of them. There will always be those ones that can just survive anything. And that's where it comes in, that you need good, clean, healthy spawn. That way it has the best chance to outcompete what's left. Now think, what you start with, there's going to be an amazing amount of competitors. By the end of this process, there will be few. Never none. That only happens with sterilization. But there'll be few. And then as you finish and you remove it from that anaerobic environment and put it back into an aerobic environment and allow it to drain, you're going to kill many of the anaerobic competitors. So the idea is, by the end of this, if you complete the entire process, you have a chance to kill and remove, discard, or use as a food source for the mycelium, once it's dead, many components from many different areas that they thrive. That is the basic idea of what we're trying to do here. This is really not like a commercially viable thing. I think there's people that have done it, maybe still do it, but the yields are not bad. But when it comes to like how much space does something take up for the yield I get, how many pounds of substrate do I need to produce how many pounds of mushrooms, when you start looking at and the fact of numbers like production, it's just not really commercially viable. Excuse me. But on small scale or small farms, it's actually pretty productive, and it's really, really cheap and easy to do. You don't hardly need any equipment. Anyone, somebody that's never even done this before can absolutely do this and have a decent success rate. With, absolute minimum investment, minimum work. But as with anything, what you put in will always equate to what you get out. Sterilized substrate blocks, a lot of people don't do those. A lot of people do ultra pasteurization or just super pasteurization, more like a 160 range held for 2 hours or 3 hours, which takes many hours to get the core of the substrates to that temperature and hold them there. You're looking at 12 to 24 hours for something like that. But in effect, you know, sterilized blocks have a much higher success rate. In my experience, higher yields. There's a few species that just won't grow on a sterile substrate, period. That they'll colonize and never do anything. But that's very few, and they're not really commercially viable anyway. Um, but anyways, moving forward, if you have space and you're not looking to grow 500 pounds a week or 1,000 pounds a week, if you're looking to grow 10 pounds here and there, 20 pounds, 50 pounds for a couple farmers markets a few times, this is a very viable option. A lot of people kind of bash on it, but if it produces and that's it, that's the end of it. That's the end of that conversation. If it produces and they can do it, then it's a viable option. Anyways, I'm going to go on and get on to the other video and show you guys the process. Okay, primitive mycology here again today, and today is one of those days. It's too nice to be on the porch or in the house or anything like that, so I figured I'd sit out here in this nice fall weather and do some cold water pasteurization of some straw. I'm going to grow some oyster mushrooms on it. This is like the easiest possible thing that you could really do to grow mushrooms. I'll edit into the video some pictures that come from a student of mine in some classes that I teach locally that I'm now starting to expand out about 80 miles from my home, both directions, before this year's over. I've been asked to speak at several different places, and here I am. I'm 6 days out of a back surgery. But you can only lay down so long before you're just dependent on what you're made of, I guess. Anyways, I'm going to enjoy a nice hot cup of tea, smoke a few cigarettes, and go over cold water pasteurization. And then I'll show you guys the bags that I'll be using. I get them from Field and Forest. I think the ones I got are like 18 by 40. And once you pack them, they're quite a bit bigger. They make huge oyster mushroom bags. You can't do that with sawdust. It's too dense. It won't work. There's not enough airspace in there. It won't colonize. It just shit the bed. Anyways, your options are two things. One or two ways for cold water pasteurization anyway. We have hydrated lime, super cheap, doesn't take very much of it. And we have bleach. The great thing about sodium hypochlorite is that about 90% of it is going to evaporate off during the process, in which I'm sure that you think bleach, oh my God, you wouldn't want to put that on your food. Well, you're not. Essentially, you only need like 2 to 5%. I used to get all specific and measure out 3%, but after you've done this a few times, you can eyeball, and honestly, I'm probably closer to 2% now. But I prefer the hydrated lime because you're working by the pH. And even though this is called cold water pasteurization, it is not really pasteurization. Pasteurization is bringing the substrate up to a certain temperature, i.e. 140, 160, and 180 for kind of ultra pasteurization, and holding that temperature for a period of time while not allowing it to be exposed to outside influence. So that would be steam pasteurization.
atmospheric steam sterilization or atmospheric pasteurization. Too many people make too many words and phrases for this that just aren't true scientifically and in a basic sense of how the world works. The chemistry process is going on here. Most people don't understand. So I'm not going to go too far into that because it's going to bring about too many questions. And there's still things that I could learn. I'm fairly knowledgeable, but this is pretty much where we're at. If you want to go the route of using bleach to clean your material, and to kill the unwanted organisms, you're going to do like 3 to 5 days soaking in 2 to 3% bleach, which in a whole, that's so very little that by the time you're done, the bleach will have evaporated. It's going to evaporate right off of it. And then as you drain, there's going to be maybe less than a 0.1% that may be residual. Which obviously, if it's safe to clean your dishes and your counter and then eat with a much higher concentration of bleach, that small amount is not going to affect anything. Anyways, we're going to be doing hydrated lime pasteurization. And again, I used to get all specific, and you really don't have to. Pretty much, you're just looking to be able to bring your pH up to between 11 and 13. Not very many things can live at a pH of that. Some things can, but it's not going to be enough competition that your spawn can't outcompete it. This is really super basic. We'll start out here. I just got a couple buckets. Spawn bag from one of my last projects. We're going to go ahead. We're just going to kind of hang out. We're going to sit here and enjoy the day. And we're going to rinse these buckets. And what I kind of prefer to do is rather than, try, to clean the material or cold water pasteurize, if some refer to as that, what I do with the bleach is I would rather rinse the buckets with the bleach and then not use it. Just a little splash in there. Run some water in there, throw the lid on and give it a good shake. It's really all that's required. There's really not even very much water in there. We'll throw a lid on it here. Give the bucket a good shake, and we'll set it off to the side. Same thing. Same thing, just a splash. A little bit of water. Trying to burn my hair over here. Same thing. Give it a good shake. Next. something to keep in mind as I try to spray the sides of the bucket, because you've already put bleach in there, and you really don't want that splashing up on your clothes unless you're doing what I'm doing today and you're still in your pajamas. Then, who really cares? Um, there's formulas for what people think are the exact amount. Well, unfortunately, there's no exact amount when you're working with an organic material for the hydrated lime. There's close approximates, yes, but depending on the manufacturer, where it's grown, what kind of soil it's grown in, and like 100 other factors is going to determine the variable pH that you may get in your straw. Um, Many people recommend not using, uh, you know, hay. I've never had a problem with it. People say, oh, it's too nutritious, it's got too much nitrogen. Well, in fact, mushrooms need nitrogen. Um, they need that energy. Yeah, too much of it's a little extreme, but it's more so a problem with your pH as that nitrogen breaks down. Um, the composting, what the mushroom mycelium's actually doing to that material. It's essentially it's composting it. Um, yes, hay is always going to be, or in my experience, has been more acidic, and we're looking to go alkaline. Suggested, you know, substrate pH for like oyster mushrooms and stuff, I think is somewhere around like the somewhere between 6.5 and 7.8 is recommended. But I will tell you this, you will see zero difference in yield, zero difference in colonization, whether your pH is 6.5 or 13 for many species. Some species it does matter. Oyster mushrooms and lion's mane, shiitake, they don't care. Um, People try to tell us these kind of things because of what optimal in nature is. Well, I'm sorry, but that does not have anything to do with growing something in vitro. Because when you're growing in vitro, you're growing on pasteurized or composted or sterile materials in which that pH doesn't apply nearly as much. Where it does apply is the idea that the more acidic you are, the more prone you are to contaminations. The easier competitors can survive. Okay, so, the idea of being at like 6.8 or 7, that's pretty neutral. But as the mycelium breaks down your material, it will become more acidic. How much? That's dependent on how rich is your substrate. How much spawn did you use? What species do you have? You know, so where you may start at optimal 6.8, just for instance, you know, um, by the end of it, by the time you're colonized and your mushrooms are ready to fruit, you're probably down to a 6 at that point. And now you're at the point where you're starting to see green mold. This is why coffee grounds work so poorly by themselves. Anybody that's done this very much knows that coffee grounds are a very dangerous territory to grow with. Now, using coffee grounds to supplement composted straw or even in your sawdust blocks a little bit, that's fine. But when you get too much of that acid in there, you get too acidic, and you're prone to bacterial and other fungus contamination, and you don't want that. We're trying to grow mushrooms and not get sick from them. Um, so essentially, um, let's try to bring our water pH up to between 11 and 13. And when that balances with the pH of the straw, we're going to hope to be about 9. That's my end goal is around 9. And I found in order to do this, there is a formula that I'm not going to go into because it just doesn't matter. When I began this, I used to think that everything had to be perfect by the book. That is so far from the truth that it's not even funny. Your lab work needs to be perfect. Your sterile technique needs to be perfect. Your grain spawn, you know, it needs to be 100% clean of contaminants. It needs to be only mycelium, and it needs to be properly prepared. As long as you've done that, you can throw that grain spawn in a flower bed and it will grow mushrooms. Maybe not as well, but then you get into putting it in bags or buckets and things like that, and now you are containing it. You're also containing every other thing in there, and you are taking away the ultraviolet rays of the sun. The sun is like a natural sterilizer, UV sterilizer in a way. Also, fresh air exchange outside, the wind blows and things like that. The constant low CO2 levels outside, around 400 parts per million. That helps things to resist other contaminants. Once you start to go into a bucket or a bag, you do have some air exchange, but you are on the anaerobic side of things. You're getting to a point where nothing can really breathe the way it should be. So that's why you now have to sterilize or pasteurize or treat it, pH treat it, change your pH, or, boil. You can also boil your straw, get you a 55-gallon drum and literally set it on bricks and put a turkey burner or start a little fire under it. Throw any piece of metal, even a piece of plywood over the top. That much distance, the plywood could not possibly catch on fire unless you were completely neglecting it. So let's get past all this. Now that this is soaked for a minute, we'll give it one more shake, and we're going to dump these buckets out. Smells clean. Smells like the pool. Now, give them a rinse here. And I tend to do one bucket at a time because now that we cleaned it, it is clean, but it's now exposed, okay? And the longer something's exposed, the more chance you have for competitors to get a hold of the nutrition that's about to be in there. So let's just keep this really simple. We're just gonna pull it off in handfuls here. This does not have to be perfect. It is going to make a mess without a question. This is another reason you want to do this outside or in a barn or, some shit like that. Do not do this in your house. Maybe in your garage if you can sweep the floor, if you've got a sand floor or something. It doesn't really matter if there's straw that gets stepped down into it. It's just going to compost there and turn into dirt eventually. That's not a problem. But don't do this to yourself. Don't do it in the house. If it's too cold and you have to do most of the process in the house, do as much as you can outside and get it in a bucket at least before you take it in. That's understandable or acceptable. But look at the straw blowing on me here as I just pull the handfuls out. Like when the bag gets a third of the way empty, it's not nearly as messy. But when you first open this thing, it's just gonna want to go everywhere. And that sucks. So what I like to do is I like to put the water in. I like to put the water in before I put the hydrated lime. And I used to go like, I would get all specific, and I would take put the straw in and then put the water in and then try to get a weight on the bucket and then go like 1 gram or, you know, roughly thereabout per pound. And that's really a waste of time. You always end up using more than you really need to, and every other kind of thing. I found that in a 5-gallon bucket, if it's packed tight with straw like this is, you know, there's just a little bit in the top exposed. That's so I can put the hose in there and it doesn't spray me. A tablespoon. One of these heaping, one of these level. So, I mean, really, you're getting like 2.5 tablespoons if they were level. That's usually enough to do the job. You know, because this will slow the ferment as well. You know, acidic environments allow things to ferment a little quicker, but it will slowly start to ferment as it soaks. And that's where your pH will begin to adjust, and you'll end up at a 9, preferably. Even if you ended up at an 8 as your end result of your actual material, that's not bad. That's fine. It's probably going to work just fine. But there is no real need. I've seen people use like, you know, a cup for a 5-gallon bucket. That does work, but it's wasteful. To me, it doesn't make sense to throw money away. I don't care how cheap it is, unless it's something that's going to cause you a problem later. If it's going to cause you a problem, it's better to spend a little money. But, you know, why are we doing this? Well, because we like to cultivate, because we like to eat mushrooms, we like to be healthy. There's a whole bunch of reasons. None of them involve us wanting to spend money, I'm sure. Otherwise, we would go to the health food store and pay $20 a pound for these. And I'm not doing that. I can grow them for about $2 a pound. Even doing it like this, with sterilized materials, I can make a 10-pound block for $2 and grow 5 pounds of mushrooms, maybe 4. Depends on how many flushes you let it go before you throw it out. For $2, you know, 4 pounds of mushrooms at $20 a pound is $80. You know, so our whole idea is, you know, sit in the yard, have a cup of tea, smoke a couple cigarettes, grow some food. Let's, you know, I always try to weigh out like effectiveness of something, of a task, effectiveness of a product versus the cost of the product versus the time it takes to do it. For something like this, you know, sterilized blocks are going to be much more efficient. You can make them in a huge batch, bag them all at once, sterilize them all at once, and then inoculate them all at once and get a much larger yield per pound. But there's a lot of other work involved. With shiitake and lion's mane and stuff like that, reishi, you know, unless you're doing log cultivation or you have sterile spawn that you're going to put in wood chips that have been fermented, soaked, things like that, that's going to create an anaerobic environment and kill a lot of competitors. That way they have a good chance of taking on. You really want to be as efficient as possible. But for this bale of straw, I think it was $10.99, maybe $11.99. The buckets you can use 100 times, 1,000 times. The hydrated lime, this whole bag, this is a 5-pound bag. I gave $6.99 for it at the local hardware store. If I would have went to a larger place like Menards instead of locally, I think Menards is like $5 for this bag, like $4.99. And there's enough in here, 5 pounds. I mean, oh my God, you could grow hundreds of pounds of oyster mushrooms, and I mean, there's enough here to do many, many buckets, because you're going to have, this is going to soak up water. It's going to, hydrate. It's going to be much, much more weight than what this is by itself. This is going to grow a lot of mushrooms. And with, straw bale cultivation or outdoor bed cultivation or these bags from Field and Forest that you do straw, these, like, it makes like a straw bale bag kind of. They're cheap, man, um, and they're large. But the beauty of it is they don't have a filter patch. They're not respirating. They're gonna use the airspace in between the straw when you load the bag to colonize. And once it colonizes, you're just gonna poke holes in it, or cut little tiny X's or little tiny slits like an inch long, and your clusters are gonna come out. You can literally, I'm going to hang these in the pine trees just to the right of me after they colonized. You know, this is gonna soak for a couple days. The spawn's already been made. I'll pack it in. I'll do a video of that, and then I'll do a video of hanging them in the pine trees. Pine trees are really dense, and they hold their needles, often late into the season. So what does that mean? The same thing a thick canopy in the spring does in the forest is it's going to hold humidity. So even when it's dry, like it is right now, there's a lot of moisture in that bag, and one walk through with the hose and a spray across the bags and end of the needles each day is going to keep it humid enough to grow some really nice mushrooms with like almost no work and zero environmental input. That is a great fall project, and oyster mushrooms like the blue oyster, the snow oyster, even palmarius will grow pretty chilly, but the blue oyster and the snow oyster, man, they'll literally, they can freeze. They can be growing, get snowed on, partially freeze, the snow melt off, and then continue growing. You know, and the colder it is when you grow them, down to a certain point, that is, if you're like 30s and 40s, they'll actually grow the best mushrooms. They'll grow slower, but the density, the color, the flavor will be much more robust. So this is, it's like a fun fall project that's going to feed you. And like I say, look at the input. A cup of tea, some cigarettes, and a bucket full of straw. Why not? Everybody's waking up to how many chemicals are put on most of the food we eat, and how bad preservatives are for you. And people are starting to come back to nature and back to growing their own food because they know it's not poisoning them. Well, um, limestone is in the earth everywhere, and concentrations in some places higher than others. But um, every organically grown vegetable there is, period, is pulling lime out of the ground that is naturally there. This is not going to hurt that substrate or these mushrooms. You know, um, there's so many things to think about in today's world that you got to ask yourself, like, would I like to spend an hour drinking a cup of tea, enjoying the nice weather, um, dicking around in the yard, um, spend a couple of dollars and then eat a couple $100 worth of food? I would. Um, yeah, why not? I know this ain't poisoning me. It's actually, there's a book there's a book called The Fungal Pharmacy that you guys should check out. Um, it goes into actual cited scientific works on many different types of mushrooms, many different funguses, um, and actual case studies, um, you know, clinical trials, things like that from all over the world on some of the benefits of these things. And you would really be astounded. You'd be surprised how many medicines have mushroom extracts in them from the pharmacy. Not like herbal apothecary stuff, which obviously they do too, the tinctures, but you'd be surprised how many pharmaceuticals are derived from fungus. Um, it's mind blowing. And the fact that you can do it yourself, why pay the insurance company to let the pharmacy poison you? Because when you get those fungal extracts, they also pair them with other things, binders and chemicals and things that cause you those side effects. That's why every medication you ever get will have side effects. Some of them are worth it. Some of them save your life. But why not get those same or at least a portion of those same compounds from healthy food without all the garbage? Anyways, this is soaked for a minute here. Let's put some lime in here. Okay. One heaping. That was a little short. You gotta get just a little bit more. Dump part of it. Then one even. And I mean, it's real simple. Just turn it over. I always flip some straw over so I'm not putting my hand directly in that shit. And just kind of push it down. Work the straw around just a little bit. And you don't have to get that lime all the way to the bottom of this bucket. There's no need to do that. Because your purpose is to raise the pH of the water. And slowly, as it sits in the water, it's going to fall between and sink through the straw. You just want to kind of get it initially going and make sure none's exposed to the air. And there you go. Put the lid on. See you in 3 to 5 days. At that point, I have a couple buckets that I've drilled holes in the bottom that I will just turn this over, transfer it in there, and put the lid on. That way things aren't falling in the top, and let it drain. It depends. Sometimes six hours will do it. Sometimes it needs, like, before you go to bed at night and then you check it in the morning. Sometimes it takes 24 hours. Basically, you want to be able to pick a handful up and squeeze it and it not run a steady stream of water out. When it's drained to the point that you squeeze, and straw is different than sawdust. Field capacity with sawdust, you want to squeeze hard and get like 2 or 3 drops come out of a handful of substrate. With straw, it has to be a little more, or it's going to seem a little more moist, but in fact, what it is it just doesn't retain as much water. So you want it to feel a little bit wetter, but you don't want a steady stream of water coming out. That'll just go bad in the bag. But essentially, you want it fully hydrated, completely wet, where you can give it a squeeze and just a little bit of water comes out. But you don't want water draining without the squeeze. Anyways, I mean, that's literally it. I'm going to do my other 2 buckets, and I'll bring the video back to show you guys the bags, and then we'll go over inoculation and draining, and then how I hang them. Super simple. Yeah, one of my students had some, really, really beautiful bucket grows with the snow oyster that I'm going to post a few pictures of. And she had never even didn't even know what a mushroom was before she came to the class. And with just a couple hours, I think like 4 hours total between two afternoons, she's producing her own. She can't make her own spawn, but she can put together the buckets and go through the fruiting process. And she's getting to eat them. It's gourmet food. Check out your local health food store. See what they're charging for fresh shiitake, fresh lion's mane, fresh oyster mushrooms. Some places are cheaper than others, but the closest place like that for me that I can get the gourmet, like exotics, things other than butt mushrooms, you're looking at $20 to $30 a pound. You know, like maitake, that's like $30 and $35 a pound, and you can grow those on sterilized substrate blocks. Um, and again, you know, I mean, you're going to harvest pounds, you know, a couple dollars. Anyways, think about it. Let me know in the comments what you think.